And when you put this cross member on, where these holes are, they point towards the rear of the car, and that's for that aluminum shield, that aluminum heat shield. Anytime I'm doing any brackets or anything, I like to always put all the bolts in first just to get them started. That way it's loose and you can center it up. You have to make any adjustments left or right, you can. As you can see, it wiggles just a little bit. This donut piece with these teeth point up, and we'll get the nut on there. And let's zip these 6 bolts on. $14mm. And right here there will actually be a gap in between that grommet and the thing. I'll finish lowering the transmission down, and let's install the drive shaft. The drive shaft is quite simple. It just slips right back on to the back of that shaft. There we go. And let's go ahead and get these mounting bolts in. And again, we'll get them both started. And what I've also found on this one here is, before you actually tighten those down, if you do these drive shaft bolts, it gives you a little bit of extra room in there. So just go ahead and spin this to make sure they're lined up, because it'll only go one way. If it's 180 off, they just don't line up as easy or as straight. Let's line it up here, and the nut goes in. It actually locks itself into place right here, so you don't have to worry about holding that side. And then go ahead and add the washer and the nut. I'm going to do that ×4. And the drive shaft won't spin unless the rear wheels are off the ground. So we did the first 3, and we'll spin this around, get the 4th one on, and lower the tires back to the ground, or you could just set the e-brake if you're going to leave it in the air to finish tightening the drive shaft bolts. Then go ahead and zip these 2 bolts on, make sure they're good and tight. If you don't want to get up and set the e-brake and it is in the air, just use 2 hands to lock that into place, and you can tighten them like that as well. Next, set your aluminum heat shield back in place. 12mm bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, and these 2 right there. Got them all hand tight. Now let's finish by ratcheting them on. Alright, we'll finish up the underside here in a bit. What we're going to do now is go ahead and tighten up the torque converter with the flywheel. So here's the flywheel, and if we look inside of there, you can see just barely the thread, which is the flywheel there. We've got to lock that into the torque converter. So what I'm going to do is get yourself like an Allen wrench or something that you can put into that thread. When you put it through that thread, you're going to come over here to where the starter is, the starter hole is, reach your hand down in there and you can spin the torque converter. See the teeth? As you spin that with your hand, the Allen wrench is going to reach in and meet the hole of the torque converter so you can get your first nut started. So essentially I spun that torque converter by hand, and through that little hole you can see when the ear of the flywheel passes through that hole. Once it does, you've got it lined up. Go ahead and get your bolt started and do it in the center of this window. You can reach in there with your fingers to get it hand tight. Then stick your little 1/4 inch 12 millimeter socket and ratchet in there to finish tightening it up. And once it starts to get snug, you need to hold it from spinning anymore by having your 1/2 inch drive ratchet on the crank bolt, which is a 22 millimeter. So as you stabilize that, it's going to hold the whole engine and transmission solid so you can finish tightening the torque converter bolt. Do that times 4. The first one's tight. Now I'm going to spin the crank until the next hole is visible. Right there. I'll get it centered up. Insert the next flywheel bolt and finish out the last 3. And slide the cover back over that housing there. Alright. Let's go ahead and put the dipstick fill tube on. I like to go underneath of the car. Yeah, you can just get it into position nice and easy this way. Just drops right into that hole. And secure it into place with the 10 millimeter bolt, and secure that bracket with the 14 back into the bell housing. Before you tighten the one little 10 millimeter down there up, make sure you put this one in as well. That way you've got them both lined up and you can tighten them down. So that top bolt is nice and tight, and we'll give this one nice and tight. Next, these cooler lines are going to be installed, and the one that goes to the rear, to line them up, front, back, back. So if you look here, well, this line is closest to us, and then there's one above it. The one that's closest to us goes further back. Put those on there and tighten them up. And we'll install the dog bone tranny mount that also mounts the air filter. Slide that on here. And when you put these bolts in, remember to do the ground wire onto here and into there with the washer and nut. Then drop the starter into place. The bottom hole of the starter goes over the mounting stud, and the top bolt has this mounting bracket on top. 14 millimeter, and just zip it into place. And go ahead and reinstall the little plug and the hot wire that powers the starter, which I tucked up out of the way. Feed it back down here, set it over that starter stud, and install this 13 millimeter nut. put the electrical insulating boot over that 13mm nut, and then we're going to do the battery ground wire to this mount here. You can see the battery wire here. This goes to the negative cable. And we'll just tighten that nut up right there. We'll button up the top side, so let's put in this dog bone mount. Doesn't matter which way it goes in. Slide that into here and set that into place. The nut and stud go on the bottom, and then the top is the long piece here. We'll feed it right into there. And go ahead and finish tightening it down. Now that the dog bone mount is on, transmission is secure. Getting close to wrapping this thing up. We'll reinstall the nut to secure this bracket. That's a 13. Sorry, 12. And plug in these sensors. So when we did the torque converter, these were tucked out of the way. We got one. Push them in, hear the snap. This one feeds to there. Listen to the click. And the third one goes up here to the coil pack. So there's 3 on that little loom. Actually, I'm going to feed this one underneath. Push for the click. And we've got the O2 sensor and the loom here and there. Plug in those wires. Okay, we've got those 2 big ones. Push them until you hear them click. And this one here on this side. And there's going to be one more that goes down for an O2 sensor. And get the air filter mount into place here. Two bolts there. Now we're going to go ahead and put on that bottom starter bolt. And slide an axle into place. We're going to line up this hole with that hole and make sure we've got a clear shot into it. So that lines up perfectly. I can see straight through it. And go ahead and get your little pin. And you can push it in there enough just to get it started. And once it's started, get your hammer and start tapping it. Nice and gentle. And then finish it off with whatever you're using as a punch. Tapped it all the way in, and you know it's good when it just kind of like a little indentation in there. You go ahead and spin it around. See how it's just in there, just below the lip? Let's check the other side now, and you can see that it's just the same. That's going to be good. So I've started the other axle. Towards the tire side, I've already fed that in. And now, I'll line this side up. That whole point towards the bottom. Let's shine the light up in there. Make sure we can see perfectly all the way through and that it's exactly lined up. If it's a little bit off, you'll be hitting the heck out of it trying to get that pin in there, and it just won't go. You keep on hitting it, man, it just won't go. Next thing you know, you got to use some vice grips to pull it out, and man, that's hard. But if you just take a second here, you can see that light shining perfectly all the way through. We've got it marked up exactly. So now, when we hit that next pin in, just a second, here we go. I'm gonna push it in just to get it started. It's gonna hold on its own. Give it a few taps. And the thing is, we're not beating the heck out of it, forcing it in there, but just enough oomph to get it going. I'll finish it off with the punch here. Alright, we tap that old hammer and get that punch in there. Just below the surface of that steel, that pin is. We'll flip it over, make sure the other side is even with it. And it is, it's just under the surface of that steel. Perfect. Let's go ahead and put on the axle nuts. So if you remember, the top one looks different. As you spin it, see that bulge? Just gonna move this in and out. The bottom one is just standard. And what I do to get those lined up, put that in here. And get yourself a screwdriver that you can feed into here. You can start to get these lined up, these bolt holes. And then get your bolt and start feeding it in as you wiggle this in order to get it lined up. And once you get that bolt started, just tap it the rest of the way through. And you can always remember which side the nut goes on, because it's the same side as this holster. So that's gonna face that. And the top one's gonna go through here. Like that. And then we're gonna line it up, that bulge. So if I look, because I didn't mark it beforehand, but if I look right in there, you can, it's nice and see that old mark where it's been sitting for years. See that right in there. And so as I spin this bolt, I can watch that rust mark line up as it was before. Right there. Now stick the nut on. hold the other side with my 19. And zap that baby on there. Now we've got to do the axle nut. Zip that baby on there. And go ahead and in that groove, take a screwdriver, a punch, and hit that with the hammer to knock that in there.